Breyer. I'm the chairman of the Democratic Party in Exeter. I'd like to welcome you this evening at Exeter Town Hall for Meet the Candidates night. This is going to be a fairly informal discussion where you have an opportunity to meet the candidates for the New Hampshire Senate, Donna Schlachman, as well as the 5 candidates who are running for the New Hampshire House of Representatives representing Exeter. I always like to start when I'm in this building by reminding people that it is somewhat humbling to be standing in the same place that Abraham Lincoln stood 150 years ago. And I assure you my words will be nothing compared to his. And hopefully you'll hear some interesting things this evening, however. I think we're going to start with Donna, is that correct? Or are we going to start with the House? Let's start with Donna. Exeter is part of a group of 9 towns that make up District 23 for the New Hampshire State Senate. And the Democratic candidate this year is Donna Schlachman. Donna is a 3-term member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives, a longtime resident of Exeter. And by the way, the format this evening is going to be very, as I said, sort of casual. We're going to give each of the candidates just a few minutes to introduce themselves and make a statement about their views and why they're running and what they bring to the position. And then we're going to open it up for questions. And so I'm going to ask Donna to speak for a few minutes, and then we'll have questions for her. And we'll open it up to the public and ask anybody who'd like to ask a question to step up to the microphone. I have a little cord here so I can move it a little further back. But since it's being filmed, it might be best if people who want to ask a question come up here. And there's somebody here from the newsletter, and they've asked that when you ask a question, please use your full name so they can identify you. Thank you. Donna?
Thank you, Bob, and thanks everybody for turning out. I have to say I'm a little bit intimidated. First of all, I showed up in casual dress. I'm just back from a long-term vacation. You can tell by my tan. This is the one year where people don't go to my husband, wow, where have you been? And then look at me and say, you can go with him, huh? So I earned my tan this summer, and I'm just getting up into campaign mode, so I'm a little bit intimidated. I'm going first, I'm underdressed, and there's a lot of people here. So anyway, this is great. I'm glad there's this much interest in the race. I hope you're all here because you are trying to figure out which one of these 5 wonderful people you may not actually get to vote for, which is a shame. We're really excited about our Democratic House candidates. So Bob has already introduced who I am, and I do have some notes here. I do have a flyer back there, so I'm going to skip all the bio stuff. I'm going to skip all the accomplishments that I have had in my 6 years in the House. I'm really proud of them. I'm not skipping them because I'm not proud of them, but I want to just lay the foundation of what my campaign for Senate is about, because it's really important to me. I had no intention when I decided to retire from the House of staying in politics. I really felt I'd worked really hard and I needed a break. But it was clear that no one was stepping up in District 23 to run. It's a really challenging district for a Democrat because it's made up of the towns. And if you're from any of those towns, please raise your hand. It's Chester, Danville, Brentwood, Epping, East Kingston, Exeter, I'll do that. Thank you. You listened, it was a test. Fremont and Sandown, and I think I got all 9. I'm hoping. So if you know those towns, you know they're pretty far from here. And so I'm excited to get out there and meet the people in those towns, but it's a lot more challenging than Exeter, which is a very walkable community. And aren't all the House candidates lucky that you are only running in Exeter because you can actually meet all the voters? So my campaign for Senate is really focused on the long-term economic, social, and health policy for this state. And if you picked up my brochure, you saw a statement that we need to stop spending money that we don't need to, basically. Basically, I really feel that we need to develop policies that take the information that we have, the knowledge we have about what keeps people healthy, independent, economic players in our state, and stop spending money because we are backing away from doing things that we have known need to be done for decades. And I'll give you just a couple examples, and I have some in my brochure. We know very well that early education and intervention is a good investment, and that by not funding programs that address issues with very young children in need, we end up spending a lot more later on their education or on the jails that they end up in, or trying to treat mental illness that has been ignored. So that's just one example of how we need to stop spending money we shouldn't need to spend. Because if we were taking care of things at the appropriate time, we wouldn't have the more costly things later on. We know, for example, that our jails, if you talk to the correctional people in the state, they will tell you that our jails are our mental health centers. Now, we did boost our mental health spending this year. We got sued by the mental health system, the state lost, so we are putting more funds into that. But we need to do better, and we can do better. Because incarcerating people who have mental illness and drug addiction, which is what our jails are filled with, doesn't reduce the mental illness, and it certainly doesn't cure the drug addiction. And another area is education. And there's two things about education I just want to highlight, and then I know I'm over my time already, and I apologize. One is that we are actually graduating kids that are financially illiterate after 12 years in public school. And this doesn't do anything for anybody. We have the whole generation of people who believe in quick money, easy money, and I bet you all have stories of someone in your family for whom this did not work out very well. And I spent a lot of time in the House fighting against payday loans, which we did outlaw, or is outlawed in the state, and title loans, which are not, unfortunately. But those are two examples of quick, easy money that are causing people to end up going to our social welfare agencies asking for help because they took out that quick loan through their title or their payday, and they can't pay it back, and they can't pay their rent, and they can't buy their food. So somebody is spending money we shouldn't need to spend, and sometimes it's the state and sometimes it's the town through our welfare system. The other educational point I wanted to make was just a bit about the brain drain, say that 12 times fast, that we have in New Hampshire, and we all know it exists. Our kids are leaving the state for college because it's too expensive. Yes, we froze tuition. Yes, we are doing a great job at the community college level to make it a more attractive alternative than a four-year program for kids to start getting into college and get the training for jobs. And yes, we've done an excellent job trying to connect what kids are being trained to do now and what jobs exist. But there's the college level is still too costly, and we still are suffering from a brain drain in the state. So, and in terms of economics, we've done a great job. We have some good policies going, not only in terms of the connection between college and job market, but there's a lot of stuff that's being done through the Department of Economic Development, which is helping small businesses get off the ground, which is helping make connections with businesses and employees. And we just got a grant in the state, I don't know if you saw the announcement, to help small businesses that want to export their products. So we're doing a really good job, and some of our economic policies and our economic backbone is improving because we understand the return on our dollar for those investments. It's the human backbone. It's the people who fill the jobs. It's the people who raise the kids. It's the people who make our community strong that I think we're failing because we're spending money in the wrong places. And we need to change that. And that's the policy level that I want to focus on. Now, if you came tonight because you love hyper politics and you wanted to hear me blast some other party or some other individual, you're going to be really disappointed. Because I'm really running on what I just said. And that's what my focus is. I've been in the House long enough to know that you need to focus on the issues, you need to focus on the people impacted by those issues. You don't need to flex your muscle, you don't need to finger point. And so you won't find that in my campaign. Thank you.
Please feel free to come forward if you'd like. No questions at all?
Abolishing the death penalty.
Yes, I'm in favor of abolishing the death penalty, and for those of you who have an opposite opinion, every issue has opposite opinions, but had I been in the Senate when the Senate took the vote, and I sat through that vote, and I sat through the debate, and I sat through the seven votes and all the 12 votes, I would have been the swing vote in that. Yeah. Yes.
Nancy?
Reverend Rockwell.
it's fine with me if you don't run on this, but I want to know if you're in the Senate and there is an opportunity, or you have to create an opportunity to make sure that reproductive care is available to women, including abortion care, to women if they need it, so we don't get up in a Hobby Lobby situation here.
You know, thank you for the question. So for those who didn't hear it who may be watching, it was a question about reproductive health care for women and protecting that right and not getting into debates about what businesses can and cannot do with regard to covering reproductive care. Is that a proper representation?
Or helping, if that becomes an issue, we're trying to find alternative coverage. I don't know what the issue would be.
Yeah, well, let me just take it kind of broadly and say that I cut my teeth as an activist on the issue of women having access to birth control. I'm 65, so I was in high school, in 10th grade actually, when the issue of women having the right, married women, having the right to access to birth control. And so I grew up with this idea that women should have control over their own reproductive health and their own reproductive destiny. And I know, and it's frustrating to me that we publicly spend so much of our resources and so much of our dollars continuing to debate this. But again, I've worked with people in my committee who I like very much, who are passionately opposed to abortion. And I think that the only way really to deal with this effectively is to give women control and to give them access to good contraception, regardless of who's providing the insurance and who's paying for it. If we really want to be responsible and help people make good reproductive decisions, we need access to safe birth control. Did I cover that enough? Okay. Well, the starring act of 5, I think, is now coming your way.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Candidates used to represent Exeter and Stratham and Northampton, and before that they represented Exeter and Kensington. We now have a situation where we have 4 representatives from the New Hampshire House that represent Exeter only, in addition to which we are part of a flotarial district that includes several other local towns, Stratham, Newfields, Newmarket, I think just the 4. And we are very lucky that we have 5 candidates who have stepped forward and expressed the interest in running for the district representing Exeter. And so what we're going to do is do this in the order in which their names will appear on the ballot. And that, of course, is a somewhat obscure system where a name is drawn from a hat, and that's the first letter, and then everybody follows that, even if it takes it out of alphabetical order. So I believe, Alexis, your name is going to be at the top. Both of the microphones are live. You need to turn them on at the top. And I would suggest you just pull them out and let the cords go and turn them on at the top. What we're going to do is ask each one of the candidates to speak for about 3 minutes about what they stand for, why they're running, give you a chance to get to know them a little bit, and then, as with Donna, we're going to open it up for questions. And so we're going to start with Alexis Simpson, please.
Microphone close enough to my mouth? You can hear me? My name is Alexis Simpson. For the past 5 years, I've been involved in public policy and advocacy work at the local, state, and national levels in support of our local food system and our local farmers. In the agriculture sector, I saw, as in many areas of the economy, that public policy can really help or hinder the movement forward, the viability of our businesses, as well as the health of our citizens. So as I saw that, I was drawn more and more into public policy. Last year, I worked on, I ran the legislative campaign to pass a GMO labeling bill that would give us the right to know what foods we consume are made from genetically engineered crops. I mention this not just because it's an important issue to me and will be in the future, but also because it gave me real insight into the lawmaking process in Concord. Our bill was interesting in that it had a 13-week subcommittee session. So I was in Concord a lot more than your average citizen would be, and was able to see the struggles that the committee goes through to pass legislation. Then as the year went on, I was up there when other bills were being debated and realizing what a small portion of our state's government my little bill was, and really wanting to work harder and more effectively and more broadly than one issue in our governmental system. So in addition to, obviously, the public policy and advocacy I care about around our local food system, I'm also a parent of children who are in the Exeter school district. And so I spend a lot of time talking to their teachers and our administrators and working together with them for the best education for my children. And I feel like that's a really great model for how we approach education in our state. So when I go to Concord, hopefully, I have such great peers up here, it's very hard for me to, so when hopefully I go to Concord, my plan is to apply that in all our discussions about education, that we need to put the needs of our children first, but we also need to work together with our teachers and our administrators to keep our public education strong. For now, I think that's about all I have to say.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Our next candidate.
Good evening, I'm Skip Berrien. Thank you all for coming here to hear about messages from these Exeter candidates. I also want to thank and Donna Schlachman, and in particular Frank Heffron, for encouraging me to undertake this run for public office. New Hampshire has many problems which the state grappling with over the next 2 years. As you've already heard from Alexis, the problems of sustainable foods, there are issues around revenue, taxation, education, infrastructure, energy, and the list just goes on and on and on. Being aware of these issues and continuing to learn more about them is a challenge for all of us. But I have no doubt that all of us up here can do a reasonable job of representing Exeter and carrying out our duties as a legislator. So, what puts me apart from these others? Children's issues have always been my concern throughout my careers as a pediatrician and child advocate. As I work and listen to families and professionals, I hear and see the problems related to obtaining behavioral and mental health. As a CASA volunteer, I see children who, due to abuse and neglect, come into the care of the state with major emotional problems. Despite their desperate needs, it's often difficult for them to find appropriate services. And it appears that without services, youth will resort to self-medication with alcohol, marijuana, and unfortunately, illegal prescription drugs. I'm sure that most of us in this room know one or more of the estimated 56,000 children with these problems and are aware of some of the barriers to getting them appropriate services. If these problems go untreated, they become an economic drain for the state, preventing our youth from moving into New Hampshire's productive workforce. For a healthy economy, we need healthy, educated workforce. As the Director of Pediatric Services, consultant to child protection agencies, and an author of legislation, I've experienced the power of effective legislative leadership in children's lives. Children in New Hampshire need the voice of experience in the legislature, and I hope that I can provide it. If I'm elected, I will work to see that the juvenile court system has more diversion programs for acting out youth. That family resource centers will expand their home visiting programs, and recommendations of the Childhood Behavioral Health Collaborative are implemented. New Hampshire's families and children and youth need all this to happen, and as a legislature, I intend to see that it does happen. None of this is an exclusion of all the other legislative imperatives. I'm prepared to address all of them with the same interest, commitment, and critical thinking which I have used throughout my adult life. So thank you very much for your attention, and I guess we move on
To Steve Briden, who's the next candidate.
Thank you. As you said, my name is Steve Briden. I was elected in 2012, so I just finished up my first term in Concord. It has been a really great experience for me. I felt like I was able to do a lot of really good work that helped people in the state of New Hampshire. In addition to being a state legislator, I'm just beginning my second year of law school at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, and I'm a UNH undergraduate graduate from Durham campus. And for me, actually to kind of echo something that Donna said, she talked about thinking about what we're spending as a state. And I want to bring it back to this idea of fiscal responsibility. It's a term that has been kind of taken over by Republicans, that say you have to cut everything all the time. And that's the only way to be really fiscally responsible. I think over the last 2 years, we've seen what the negative side effects of that are. They cut the uncompensated care for hospitals so badly that it led to a lawsuit that put the state in danger of losing $400 million. These are really serious things that affect the long-term viability of New Hampshire. When you cut higher ed tuition, cut higher ed reimbursements like they did, it led to an increase in higher education costs that put an entire generation of New Hampshire students in a really bad place. New Hampshire students graduate with an average debt load of over $30,000, and that's not sustainable. It's the second highest in the United States. The in-state tuition at UNH is the third highest in the country for any public schools. So when we think about how we're going to manage our money, we need to think not just how it's going to affect this budget, but how it's going to affect us in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. And so that's why I really want to head back to Concord this year, because I want to make sure that we focus on what these long-term effects are going to be. We have an entire generation of kids who are going to be in their 30s or 40s before they're going to be able to think about buying a house. And that's bad for them, but it's bad for everybody else too, because they're not pushing the economy forward, those new house purchases. They're not buying the cars that are getting the money into the car dealerships, that are bringing in revenue to the state. So it's really important that we focus on not just the short term, but the long term. And if I have your support, and if you send me back to Concord, that's where I'm going to be placing my focus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. The next.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Paula Francese. Naturally, I live in Exeter. I am married. My husband and I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. We have lived in New Hampshire for about 25 years. 20 of those years we've lived in Exeter. I came to New Hampshire in 1989 to teach at the business school at the University of New Hampshire. I taught accounting and marketing to the students in the hospitality management department. Prior to coming to New Hampshire, Peter and I lived in Ithaca, New York, where we raised our children. And while we were living there, I was working in the banking industry. As the years went by, I decided that I wanted to go back to graduate school, perhaps later in life than most sane people would do so. But I finished my education at the Cornell Hotel School and then came to New Hampshire to teach at UNH. And I'm retired now. And so the question is, why did I decide to run for state rep? There was a practical reason to begin with. I knew that Donna Schlachman and Eileen Flockhart were going to retire. And after several years of really excellent representation in Concord, it meant that there would be two fewer female voices in the House. And I believe that it's very important to have women representing us in the legislature. And that was one requirement that I could fulfill quite easily. Beyond that, more seriously, I have to say that I have been extremely excited about the accomplishments that have come out of the legislature in the last 2 years. With a Democratic majority in the House and under the capable leadership of our wonderful Governor, Maggie Hassan, some terrific things have happened. They've been mentioned by my colleagues up here on the stage. And as I began to seriously consider running for the House, I thought, I want to be part of that. The next few years are going to be very challenging, and there will be legislation that will come before the legislature on subjects that I'm very interested in, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I do want to say that one of the most exciting parts of the legislation that has taken place in the last couple of years is that we have overcome, or hopefully obliterated, some of the fiscally irresponsible legislation that came out of Concord during the Tea Party reign in 2010, 2011, and on into 2012. I am a person who puts people above politics. And my concern is for the average middle-class family person in New Hampshire. And with thinking ahead, with the legislation that will be coming up, the things that matter to me and that I'll be focusing on if I'm elected have to do with improving the lives of average citizens in New Hampshire. As I've never run for office before, and I admire Donna's track record and her experience in the legislature, and Steve and Frank also have been there. They know what it's like to get this legislation through. I don't have that experience, but I have hope. There are at least 3 things that are at the top of my list that I would be very concerned with, as I say, if I was elected. The top of the list is education. The next thing would be the environment and energy. These are, as you probably, I'm sure you all know, these are very difficult issues that the state of New Hampshire is going to have to tackle over the next few years. And to finish that little list of mine, I would add to that something that's been left hanging, and I hope we can settle it, and that is increasing the minimum wage in New Hampshire. There are families in New Hampshire that are struggling to get by, and it's unconscionable that both the federal government and our state government has not increased the minimum wage. I want to be there when that happens. Now, as far as my qualifications for being a state rep are concerned, I look back on, as I said, I've not been in public office before, but I did spend many years in banking. I know my way around financial statements. Business doesn't scare me. And many of the things that happen in Concord involve an understanding of business and finance. The other thing I think I've got in my favor is that I have spent many years as an academic and a researcher. There's nothing I love more than researching a topic. And to add the cherry on the sundae, to be able to act on that legislation would be a real honor for me. So I think that gets down to the last of my little list of concerns. Obviously, there's many more things to be concerned about. But I thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. The final candidate is Frank.
Good evening. Thank you, Bob. Thank you all for coming. And also, many thanks to Donna, who is here with us this evening, and Eileen Flockhart, who's out of town this week, for the years of service, the extraordinary service that they gave to the House. And it was a pleasure to be able to observe that for the last couple of years. Good luck to Donna in her race for the Senate. And I would mention that Eileen and Donna very graciously wrote a letter to the editor endorsing my candidacy. So thank you very much for that. As Paula, among others, mentioned, tremendous progress was made in the last 2 years during the current session of the New Hampshire legislature. More can be said about that later. There's a huge laundry list that we've been provided with, that we've been burdened with, but things really did happen this year for the better. I'm running for re-election because I think I've been an effective member of the Democratic majority that accomplished so much. I'm going to read, they tell us in the House, keep your speech to 3 minutes and write it out. So, making laws is a complicated and laborious process. Much of my time was spent on the work of the Judiciary Committee, attending hearings on bills, drafting and considering amendments, attending executive sessions at which debates and voting were held on the bills. Once a week, usually, the whole House meets in session to debate and vote on each bill, whether or not they're recommended by the committee. It can be tedious at times. Unfortunately, as someone who spent 37 years as a lawyer, I enjoy the work and have a good record of attendance and participation. I'm proud to say that the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Marjorie Smith, who's been in the House 18 years and was twice chair of the Finance Committee, is now chair of the Judiciary Committee, and she wrote a letter to the Exeter newsletter commending my work as a freshman member of the committee. What would I like to accomplish in the next session? I'm a liberal Democrat. I would love to help pass bills that support early education, make a dent in income inequality, protect the environment, and a woman's right to fairness in the workplace. I worked at opposing the death penalty since my first job as a lawyer at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund back in the 60s. This year the House voted by a large margin to repeal the death penalty. But that measure failed, as Donna said, by one vote. And I would like to be there to cast one of the votes for a repeal bill that does become law. Those things only happen if there are a lot of Democrats there to make them happen. Only if there are a lot of Democrats with regular attendance at committee meetings and House sessions. Only if there are a lot of Democrats who will support the agenda of our governor, Maggie Hassan, and the House leadership. If we have that kind of a majority, good things will happen. If by chance the pessimists are right, and the Republicans would gain a substantial majority in the House this year, I want to be there to uphold Maggie's vetoes. Especially when they try to ban, as they did in 2011, gay marriage, cut back on education and social programs, and authorize the carrying of guns in the House of Representatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you. We're going to move a little rapidly from here on in. First question, on jobs. We do not, first of all, let me say that I think we're very lucky in New Hampshire to have people of this ability and talent who are willing to step forward for an unpaid position. You get a couple $100 a year plus a toll thing, right? And a license plate.
I think that's over.
100 a year. And to find people that are willing to go to Concord and act on our behalf of this caliber is really wonderful. So thank you all for stepping forward and volunteering. question about jobs, and we'll kind of move fast, and everybody try to answer in less than a minute if you don't mind. We do not expect our elected officials to create jobs. That's the job of the private sector. But it really is important legislatively to help create a climate that improves both the number and the quality of jobs for New Hampshire citizens. If elected, what do you think specifically we could do on the jobs front to improve the situation in the state of New Hampshire? Steve? And we'll work our way across.
Well, I think one of the first things on quality is an easy one. We need to raise the minimum wage in New Hampshire. The cost of living in New Hampshire is way above the national average, but our minimum wage is the federal minimum. And that just doesn't make any sense. It hurts people's ability to start families. It hurts young people's abilities to move forward. In terms of creating jobs, one of the biggest things that we can do is make sure that our graduates from the University of New Hampshire and from the community college system stay here and start businesses here. You know, we can do that by making sure that we have grant programs available, keep working on these public-private partnerships between the community college system and the government of the state. They won't stay if it's not economically feasible for them. New Hampshire is a great place to live. We always rank really high in places to live. But you know, if you can make $15,000 more if you move down to Massachusetts, or you can go to the UMass Amherst and come out with 20% of the debt load, some people are going to make those decisions. So if we want to really focus on keeping jobs in New Hampshire and making sure that we continue to be one of the states that's leading in high-tech jobs, we need to make sure that we're making the investments today that are going to make sure those jobs are there in the future.
And the schools. There's a lot of opportunity there and a lot of success shown in other places as well. So I'm hopeful that that's one way to keep people in the state and that jobs will stay.
I think there are three things that I think of when it comes to job creation and improving the business climate. The first one is kind of what's already been alluded to, and that is having an educated workforce. That will attract companies to this state. The second is cheaper energy costs, and we really do need to be looking at alternative renewable energy sources and addressing some of those. And I know in the last legislature there was an effort to they did create a commission or something to look at the siting of alternative energy sources and transmission lines and things of that sort. And then the third area is you constantly have to look at the regulations that inhibit economic development. And I know here in town that is an issue where we constantly have to look at what is keeping companies here, what's prohibiting them. And so I think we need to do the same in the state. And again, I know in the last session there was some real efforts to clean up some of those regulations, but it needs to be continued.
I would go back to what I said before about the minimum wage. I think increasing the minimum wage is critical as far as jobs in New Hampshire are concerned. I also, because I am at heart an academic, I am very pleased with what has been happening at the community college level in New Hampshire. I hope you have all been following the work that Dr. Ross Cattell is doing with the community colleges, including, if I understand correctly, reducing the tuition. It's education that is critical for a solid base of workers in New Hampshire. I was reading the other day about something that I didn't know about before, and it was an eye-opener. There recently has been established at UNH in the engineering school a liaison position that is for the purpose of forming an advanced manufacturing coalition that partners the university with businesses in New Hampshire. And I think some of my colleagues have mentioned it before. I do think the secret to a lot of our job problems will be found in the cooperation between the educational establishment, between the university, the community colleges, and again, if you follow what Ross Cattell is doing, he is doing a tremendous job in helping the students at the two-year college level either finish their education there and go on to meaningful jobs that the employers in New Hampshire, they find candidates for jobs that are well educated because of the foresight that is coming out of the administrators at the university. And I'll pass it over to Frank now.
I would just add one thing that the legislature did do this year. Although we passed a budget that restored funding to many much-needed social services, it was a balanced budget. It was a bipartisan budget. It did not raise taxes or fees. Now, outside the budget, a significant measure was passed, and that was raising the gas tax by about 4 cents a gallon. That had not been raised in 15 to 20 years. It seems not to have affected prices here in New Hampshire since it went into effect July 1st. It's going to enable all of that money, absolutely has to go to improvement of our roads and bridges. That will create jobs when people go do that. And so I think that's one good thing. We actually passed a bill in the House that would have raised it 4 years running and added many more opportunities to improve roads and bridges, but the Senate did not go along with that. So we compromised and settled for 1 good year. Thank you.
It's not a majority in the House, but to make sure we have a Democratic majority in the Senate. So that was an inexpensive pitch for Donna's campaign. Are there any questions from the audience? Nancy?
Yes, I raised the same question, and particularly Skip and Steve, I'd like to hear from you and Paula, the three. I don't know where you stand on this. Will you be active in voice as well as vote for women's free access to reproductive health, all levels of reproductive health? Will you support equal pay for women and the early childhood care for working mothers?
Frank, do you want to start with Nancy Rockwell's question? We'll go back and forth. Would that be okay?
I think it's fair to say I would be favorable on all of those issues, and in particular, Mayoral pro-choice. New Hampshire, they keep a list of who's voted with them and who's not voted with them, and my record is favorable for 100%.
The simple way to answer your question is yes. I keyed into something that Donna said when she was making her remarks. We're about the same age. And I certainly have appreciated being a woman who has matured during these decades where women's rights have progressed. There's been some sliding back. There's no question about that. You mentioned Hobby Lobby a while ago, and I would never want to have something like that happen in New Hampshire. So yes, I am in favor of legislation that benefits women in all areas.
Simple yes to. In terms of, I'm certainly in favor of comprehensive reproductive health rights for women. The issue that keeps coming back, and I hear that it keeps repeating itself in the legislature in all sorts of forms, is ways of keeping women from having those services paid for. And so I think that that's really an important thing we have to stay right on top of and recognize the way these issues infiltrate our legislation. In terms of early childhood education, it's been my life, taking care of little kids. kids and seeing the need for early childhood education. And I think you also mentioned equal pay for equal work with women. I'm for everyone having equal pay for equal work, no matter what your gender, and I really am for a livable wage.
I don't know, do you want me to answer as well? You know how I feel, but maybe for others. I grew up in a time when I took for granted right to contraception and abortion as things that would not be questioned in my lifetime. So it's been very troubling for me in the last number of years to see what's been happening. I was a peer educator for Planned Parenthood for contraception for women in college, and thought that that was a really responsible use of my time to talk with women about these important issues. And as a pastor, of course, I've counseled women who've had to make really hard choices, and I know how difficult that is for them. So I take it very seriously. And then it's probably obvious that I'm for equal pay for equal work. Having spent a lot of time taking care of my children while my husband worked, and knowing what it's like to do really hard work that is not compensated financially, I take that very seriously, that we need to compensate people for the work that they do.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of it's been said already, but like Frank, I have 100% voting record on pro-choice issues. I think that a woman's body, the decisions about a woman's body come from the woman. There shouldn't be anybody standing over them, telling them what they can and can't do. I'm very against a lot of, we've seen Texas recently in the news, this idea of passing regulations that make it safer. Everybody knows what it is that they're doing. I mean, you're trying to use a backdoor to get around the Supreme Court rule about making sure that women have access to abortion and access to birth control. So that's something that I will continue to fight for. Equal pay, I kind of had 3 votes this past year that I left Concord, and I wanted to call my wife or call my parents, and voting to increase the minimum wage, even though it didn't work out in the Senate, voting to repeal the death penalty, and then voting for equal pay. For me, it's astounding that that's even an issue still, but when you look at the numbers, it still is. Whether it's 23 cents, 12 cents, 5 cents, it doesn't matter. There should be absolutely no difference. There's no excuse. And if we need a law that looks over people's shoulders to make sure it gets done, then that's what we'll do. And then finally, on early childhood education, when you're talking about building a citizenry that is able to move the state forward, I mean, that's step one. You have to make sure that you have the money available for the people who come from less fortunate situations. That makes all the difference. Having that early childhood intervention there to make sure that they're getting the reading help that they're not able to get at home because mom and dad both work, or only mom's there, or only dad's there. So those types of interventions, they mean so much to those kids. When those kids grow up, they mean so much to the state.
Thank you.
The New Hampshire coalition to abolish the death penalty worked very, very hard for over a year, and the abolition failed by 1/7 vote, which means that in the new legislature, the House representatives will have to vote again, and I have no doubt that they will do a good job. But I just would feel reassured if each of you would state whether you're still willing to vote for abolition of the death penalty in New Hampshire.
Perhaps a simple show of hands would suffice. That would be 5 out of 5. Are we okay with that, Elsa? Okay. Are there any additional questions, please? Ma'am?
Over here in the front row.
Sir.
This gentleman's been trying to raise his hand. 10 minutes right here.
Your name?
I'm Harry King, and I'd like to address a question laws which never had. Today, in this country, the prisons seem to be the #1 place where the mentally ill are stored. pressing situation relative to facilities. In the hospitals, many times people are held over in the hospital for days, waiting for some kind of place for people to go. Well, will you address the question of service to mental health?
This is a huge issue, and I think what some people don't realize is when you take people who have these severe mental issues and put them in prison, it costs a lot more to put them there. So we're doing ourselves a disservice on two different levels. One, we're not helping people who need our help, and two, we're adding a financial burden to ourselves because we're not willing to go out there and do that work. We need to make sure that we're investing all the way from the local level with community health centers, trying to make sure that people have access to care. A lot of people that have issues like that, they don't have the money to go be checked into some really nice private facility. They need the rest of us to get together and make sure that we have a truly rehabilitative system that can help them get life skills that they need to move forward, or to rehabilitate them so that they can get jobs and they can work. What they don't need is to be put in a prison where they don't get any of that. They cost the state lots of money, and then they come out of it somebody who has very little chance for success.
I feel like this is a very complicated question, and it's hard for me to think creatively when I think of the funding constraints that are currently in place for us, the realities right now. So I can't say that I have some magical solution that you, Frank, and Steve, and Donna, and others have not been able to put into practice right now. But what I do feel like is that if we could invest money into our partnerships in the community and really work with the resources we have in the community and spend our money making those relationships strong, I think that will have a tremendous payoff. I also know I have a couple of brothers in medical school, one of whom wants to be a psychiatrist, and I know that even finding enough psychiatric doctors to serve people who are in mental distress, have mental health issues, is really hard, even in Massachusetts. So I think there's a lot of different aspects of that question, and I hope that we together try to solve some of those issues.
Alexis, I agree. I think this collaboration within communities is particularly important. Of course, my orientation towards kids says we should have early intervention. And I understand that in the schools here in Exeter that there are community mental health, Seacoast Community Mental Health does have staff in the elementary schools. They have some in the middle schools, but they don't have any in the high schools. And so we need a little more of that kind of collaboration so that we are getting out ahead of this problem, so that as kids are leaving school, they are in much better shape if they have experienced some emotional disorders. I'd also step back a little bit further in that, and I mentioned home visiting services for families. And many families, these issues have very deep roots. And if you have home visiting in the home that can identify these issues early and get families hooked up with the resources that are in their community, I think we can go a long way to preventing the more serious problems, which then do end up in the prison system.
I appreciate you bringing up the question. My exposure to this issue has been what I have heard on the local press. And I've gathered that this issue of insufficient facilities and treatment regarding mental health goes back to what's a fundamental issue for many issues in New Hampshire, and that is money. There's only so many dollars to go around, and I wish that there were more associated with this problem. Just as I'm hoping that we can make progress with our veterans, the treatment of veterans. The veteran hospital facilities in New Hampshire can be greatly improved if we had the money to do so. And I have a feeling that there are many veterans who would come under the aegis of this issue of mental health. We have to do something because the lack of facilities is putting a great deal of pressure on our hospitals. There are not enough beds, there are not enough facilities, and there's not enough staff to handle these problems. So it's not something that I am an expert on by any means. I appreciate you bringing it up because I will look into it further. And it would be my hope that the Health and Human Services Department would eventually, with the right effort on the part of the people who can make a decision about that, come up with some more money to do a better job.
I don't have any particular insights on this issue. Just a few things I could say. I do believe that under Obamacare, there are expanded ability, that is, there's additional coverage to get some mental health services. And we did expand Medicaid. It was quite an achievement in the legislature this year. And I certainly agree with Paula, and I think with everybody. We need the money, and New Hampshire is really constricted because of the tax situation, and there is no broad-based tax. Nobody wants to consider it. I don't think there's a chance in a million that it would pass, something like that would pass the legislature in the coming few years. But we need to do something, but I really don't have an answer on how to go about it.
Thank you all.
I was going to ask about, because I hadn't heard anybody talk about taxes much at all. And it's a big deal in Hampshire. And I worked on special use, if anybody remembers that, so you couldn't put a house lot on a farm because the tax got taxed. The farm would get taxed out. And that's been very useful, especially in a state that has summer people coming that don't want to get built up everywhere. So this is environmental stuff. It probably has too many rules. But I'd be perfectly happy to tax soda pop, probably fancy cars, all those things to get money for the things that really matter. And I don't know why we can't do more with this. And that's really all I have to say.
So it's really a question about revenue. And there are a lot of people who claim that the state of New Hampshire has a spending problem, and there are others that claim that we have a revenue problem. And I'm wondering if each of you would like to address that.
I'll start. The third rail of politics here.
I said you might want to address it, you might not.
Well, I just see, pardon?
I see you're so bold.
I think there are two different issues here. I think there is the revenue issue. Do we have enough revenue in this state? And that's a conversation which I think we need to have. And that has to do with the resources that we have and the services that we have and what do we need. And I would really like to see there to be a real discussion about that, a statewide discussion. It's beyond the legislature. It has to really get outside of the walls of the legislature and really find out how the state really feels about those issues. And then the second issue is taxation. And I think we all also have the impression that our property taxes are dependent upon too much. It's like 66% of our spending comes from property taxes in this state, among the highest in the country. So if we want to reduce property taxes, then we need to find other sources of income, whether it's a broad-based tax, sales or income tax, whether it's an inheritance tax or an asset tax. There are things that but I think that the first decision has to be whether or not we need more revenue and why we need more revenue.
Next. This is third rail of politics for sure, and I do feel like a neophyte when it comes to this issue. What I can say about my own feeling on funding our government and our services is that, first of all, I have an open mind. I look forward, I know that this is going to come up, and I'm hoping that I will be in the legislature, and it's a constant problem to find the money that we need in order to fund the services that we want. And I know that on the Republican side, there will be many candidates who would like to kill a lot of projects and services that we have in the state simply because the objective would be to cut back on government and cut back on taxation. But I would challenge those candidates to ask themselves exactly what services would they do without? Push is going to come to shove, I think, sooner or later. Donna made some interesting comments. I defer to Donna because of her experience, but Donna, I believe you said that there were ways to cut back as far as the budget is concerned. Am I right about that? Or you sort of...
This isn't my time for the floor. My point was that I thought we were spending money, too much money where we didn't need to spend it.
Okay.
And so it's an interesting revenue versus spending issue. And it would take me longer to go into the details. But I think we have the money, we're just not allocating our resources where it needs to be allocated, so we're not spending money where we don't need to be spending it. It goes back to everything you all have been saying about prevention and intervention.
I didn't mean to put words in your mouth, but I know that you have been in the legislature when the opportunities come up to look over the budget and see where savings can be had in order to spread money in the direction where funds are needed. So I don't have an ironclad answer as far as taxes are concerned. All I can say to you who are in the room tonight is that when these issues come up, I will give them my full attention and my mind is open.
And that's not a bad answer. I think I already mentioned that we do have a revenue problem, and we do need to rethink the way we raise revenue. And even the Republicans, they refer to New Hampshire as having a structural deficit. That is, we just have to face the fact that we can't afford we can't afford to do all the things we would like to do because we just have no way to raise the money. And it would be great if we could do something. One of the people I admire most in this community is Dave Weber. He's become chairman of New Hampshire Priorities, which used to be called New Hampshire Coalition for Fair Tax, or something of that nature. And they certainly would like to have a conversation on this issue. And 2 years ago, there was a proposed constitutional amendment to put in the Constitution that there could not be an income tax. And David and Pat Yasha and I organized a meeting held right here, and we got speakers, pro and con, and raised awareness on that issue. And Exeter was one of the few communities to vote against it. The proposal did get a majority statewide, but it didn't get a big enough majority to amend the Constitution.
Likewise, I've been struggling with this for months and months. The GMO labeling bill was had a fiscal note of $130,000 on it, and there was a lot of thinking that simply because there's a fiscal note like that there's no way the bill would have passed, no matter what we believe or think is right, that alone would kill the bill. I think that probably contributed to its demise, but I struggle with how do we justify that kind of money when it seems like we all have issues that we care about a lot, and people who we know who need the services and the support of the state, and that's fair and that's just, and we need to make it happen, and there seems not to be easy answers. I know in the Department of Agriculture there are services that our farmers would like some help with, specifically around organic certification, and the organization that I'm on the board for, we're trying to figure out how we can step up and help with some of the information. We already do education, but with some of the more informational, specific stuff relating to the law that they used to have time and staff to do and just don't have it to do anymore. So I can't say that I have studied the budget detailed dollar by dollar to know where the money for that could come from, but it's obviously where a lot of our time and energy, any of us who are elected to go to Concord, it's where a lot of our time and energy would be spent, how to solve this problem.
I mean, kind of going back to Bob's original question, I think New Hampshire has both, a spending problem and a revenue problem. The spending problem, though, is in misallocation of spending. I mean, Donna talked about it a little bit, we talked about it so far. This spending way more after the fact because we're unwilling to put money up front. We talked about, mental health already. When you put that money into preventative care, it's worth a lot more to the state. I mean, you're going to end up saving money in the long run. But on the revenue side, we have a very strange collection of revenues, taxes that we build the state on, and they're not stable. A considerable amount of our money comes from, it was in the news, the hospital tax, Medicare enhancement tax, that the court found unconstitutional. Now, the governor did an excellent job of brokering a settlement with the hospitals in order to avoid what would have been a huge budget catastrophe. But that problem is still there. If a Republican majority returns to the legislature and they decide that they want to cut that uncompensated care money that balances out the tax that they pay, we're right back into the place that we were before. Cigarette tax revenue, which is a good thing, has fallen because less people are smoking. So you can think about raising that tax money, but it's diminishing value every year. And we have the alcohol tax, we have the rooms and meals tax. And the rooms and meals tax is about as high as it can go, until you start getting into some kind of ridiculous levels. So, there are always lots of little things that people throw out there. We can raise $50 million here and $50 million there, whether it's casino bill, whether it's marijuana legalization. And those are things that you can consider, but they're not long-term fixes to the issues that we have. So like Skip was talking about, we need to sit down and say, if we want to have a strong New Hampshire going forward, what are the things that we have to pay for? How much money do we have to get to that point? And we need to keep everything on the table to figure out how we're going to get there, or we're going to keep going through these cycles of cutting things, cut the community health, get a lawsuit, cut the hospital tax reimbursements, another lawsuit, cut higher ed funding, and just pass the burden on to kids. So, we need to think about long-term solutions, and we can't be taking stuff off the table at this point.
Excellent answers. Thank you all very much. Dan?
I'm of Exeter. I also serve on Exeter's Select Board. I'd like to lay out two facts and then ask you a question that I think will probably have a quick answer. The first fact, the town of Exeter is under an administrative order with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to upgrade our wastewater treatment plant. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars to comply with the order. The second fact, if one, or hopefully 80% of you are elected to the legislature, you will only be representing the town of Exeter. That's all you represent. Now obviously, you have an obligation to the state as well, but those are your constituents here in Exeter. So those are the two facts that I want to lay out. My question is this: will you, if elected, advocate on behalf of the ratepayers, the water and sewer ratepayers of this town, with state and federal elected officials and officials within the bureaucracy of both states to get money to defray the massive cost of this administrative order from the EPA? Thank you.
I'd like to answer that first, because I've been thinking about that. Dan, I think that's the only way that it will happen, is if we are all actively advocating at both the state and the national level to figure out how to get help to pay for the upgrade. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have something that's going to affect the town of Exeter's budget to that level, which is an extraordinary level, we all need to work together. It helps that the governor is from here, and will continue to be the governor after this year. And we all have to get together and do the work that we need to do to make sure that the people of Exeter don't have a very drastic change to their tax. So that's what that would end up being.
This really is a statewide issue. It affects the Great Bay, and that's the whole purpose of us doing this, as well as it's just good practice for us to upgrade our wastewater treatment. So I have no hesitation in thinking that the state should pony up for this, and whatever federal resources are available, I certainly would be advocating for that as well.
Going into this with the amount of knowledge that I have right now, Dan, I would say yes, I would do that. But I also would feel much better about my answer to you if I had time to research the issue. But I think fundamentally, yes, this has to be done. And so I'll do everything, if I'm elected, I will do everything I can to see that cooperation is in place and do what is best for Exeter.
I would certainly be happy to work with the group, get together with the other legislators, get together with the Board of Selectmen, have our strategy, and advocate as hard as we can to get what we really think we need.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm going to call this the Jim Kennedy question. The late James Kennedy, who was a rep from Exeter, Democratic rep in the New Hampshire House, would speak with tremendous pride of one thing that happened while he was in Concord, and that was the ability to pass and sign the Marriage Equality Act and have New Hampshire be very far ahead of the curve nationwide as far as marriage equality is concerned. Quick question, quick answer. If you go to Concord, what's going to be your Jim Kennedy moment? What's the one thing that you would really like to be able to come back to Exeter and say, as he would with pride on his face, guess what we passed?
That's unfair.
I'll take it. Well, I don't think the residents of Exeter would stand up and cheer, particularly when I got what I want, but I mentioned it in my opening remarks. I worked on abolition of the death penalty for, I think, 50 years. And we almost got there this year, and if we can get there in the next term, I'll be very pleased.
Well, I have a long list, but I think right now I would be in seventh heaven if I could be in the legislature when we have a solid plan in this state for alternative energy and solving the problem with issues like Northern Pass and compromising on those issues, but and heading the state. I know we're already down the road. The path is being laid. But I would like to see strong alternative energy possibilities for the state of New Hampshire and have everyone behind it.
I just wish there were a sentinel moment that I could even envision. Obviously, my issues with young families and children are paramount, and I just can't come up with that moment which would really encompass that pinnacle or that zenith of my experience. So I'm going to have to pass.
I think for me it would definitely be the labeling of genetically modified foods. Not to sound like a broken record, but it's been the Seacoast food community that has been really supportive to me and to all of us through that fight. And I think coming home, we'd throw a really big party. Yeah, probably have good food.
Party with food.
Oh, lots of good food. Oh, yeah.
I feel like one of the big things for me, I mean, this year we had a constitutional amendment to protect people of same-sex orientation. And in addition to that, the reason that it went down in Concord was because people from the transgender community felt like they were left out. And we're the only state in New England left that doesn't protect transgender individuals and people of different gender identities. So, we're going to work really hard this upcoming year to make sure that we get a constitutional amendment to New Hampshire's constitution to protect the right of same-sex orientation and transgender and gender people with different gender identities.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening.